We choose to go to the moon in this decade and do the other things, not because they are easy, but because they are hard.
You're listening to Founder Stories with Anouk and Barak. Brought to you by F2 Capital in partnership with IDC International Radio and No Camels.
When I started Ourcrowd, there were people who said, well, look, I'll bring you kosher food to Leavenworth, the federal penitentiary. Not that it's going to fail. You're going to go to jail.
Hi, and welcome to Founder Stories. Today on our show, we have Ourcrowd founder Jon Medved, who's been described in the book Startup Nation as one of Israel's best business ambassadors. He talks about going from a Hebrew school dropout from 1960s California to becoming a Jewish Orthodox business legend, staring down the skeptics to found the most successful crowdfunding platform on the planet. So, Jon, first of all, I'm very disappointed because I had prepared a whole question about your Hawaiian shirts, and here you are with a formal work shirt. Are the days of the Hawaiian shirts past?
Far from it. In fact, if any of your listeners have any good suggestions for sort of like edgy new Hawaiian shirts, because I'm sort of stuck in the era of Jam's World and a little Tony Bahama and things like that, I would be happy to hear from you. But no, I'm actually meeting tonight with a group of Chinese businessmen. And I've found that when I show up with my sort of completely outrageous Hawaiian shirts, it's too much. My personality is weird to begin with, and I'm a little bit less formal than they're used to. So for the Chinese, I wear the button down.
Yeah, and however, you did come with a cowboy hat.
I did.
Yeah. So you made up for the lack of the Hawaiian shirt. I'm not sure the Chinese will understand that either.
No, I'll explain to them that my investment philosophy is definitely cowboy on steroids.
Right. That sounds great.
So let me ask a serious question as well, Jon. You know, you're an investor in my fund, and I'm a big admirer of Ourcrowd and everything you've accomplished. But, you know, be honest with us. If it weren't Anouk asking you for this interview, would you have done it?
Never. Never. I mean, you know, look, this is one of the major power couples here in Israel, which have both innovation, media, startups, and just good vibes in plethora. So I'm really happy to be here.
I think we've always had a good connection.
Yeah.
We don't see much of each other because you're in Jerusalem and I'm Tel Aviv
It's
area.
so
but
far away.
Yes, it is. Isn't it? It is a universe apart. It really feels that way. I haven't been to Jerusalem in years. Barak, we have to go.
Wait a minute, but you missed my summit? We had like 18,500 people sign up.
I know. I was abroad. No, I was abroad for it.
That's the only excuse I'll buy.
Yes, absolutely. Jon, I remember when you started Ourcrowd back in 2013, many industry leaders looked down at Ourcrowd at the time and said that it could never work, that good founders wouldn't come to you and investors would lose money. How did that make you feel, and how does it make you feel now?
I feel great now, and I felt great back then. And look, when you're a founder, you can't listen to the doubters. If you do, you're really in trouble. I mean, in fact, there's an investment I made in a company that makes a tiny little mass spectrometer called Consumer Physics. And I remember when I actually went to get diligence on it, 4 out of 6 of the experts said, don't do it. And I thought those were great odds. I thought 2 out of 6 was wonderful. It was a high risk thing. You got to go for it, okay? And when I started Ourcrowd, there were people who said, well, look, I'll bring you kosher food to Leavenworth, the federal penitentiary, because not that it's going to fail. You're going to go to jail because you're busy, hawking private companies in the public domain. You can't do that. And I said, wait a minute. We're a venture capital fund platform because we have funds that are either like F2 Barak's fund, which we're very proud investors of, which has a multiplicity of companies, a big portfolio, or we have single company funds. So even when you pick a company like Consumer Physics or Zebra Medical or Insight Tech or any of the companies we've invested in, you're actually investing in a fund structure. So that's what allowed it to happen. So we didn't go to jail. We're Doing
Not
really
yet.
well. Not yet.
Not yet. No, no.
Not
Your
nev-
cowboy hat
not-
might get you in
not-
jail.
Not never. Maybe in Texas, just by not looking the part properly. But no, I even wear it in Texas, by the way.
Right.
The other thing is that we proved that we could actually get not just deals, but really good deals. And I think that that's the thing which makes me the most proud is that, when people look at Ourcrowd today and they go to the website, they look at the deals and say, wait a minute, these are really good deals. Okay, how are you doing that? And the answer is the crowd. The fact that we are able to not just bring money in a new way, but to bring added value, to make connections, to help people recruit management, to do all that stuff that really defines what's smart money and dumb money in the venture capital business. Because the dumb money thinks it's all about picking a deal. And once you've picked, you're done, the work's over, sit back and relax. The smart money realizes you have to get started and move your butt in gear at that point. And luckily, we have 30,000 butts we can move.
Right.
So which startups, for example, are you most excited about that you've done this year?
Oh, come on. That's like asking about my
It's a
kids.
layup. We're warming up here.
Which of my kids do I love? Oh, God, there's so many cool companies. We have a company now called Nanomedic, which is like a real-life Spider-Man gun that sprays an artificial layer of skin, which can be infused with antibiotics or collagen or cannabis, and it replaces essentially a bandage. You can see through it, you can shower with it, and it falls off automatically. And when you think about what this is going to mean for burn victims around the world, it's just unbelievable. You don't have to, change the dressing, and it just falls off, and the person heals. And I like that one, a lot.
Yeah.
I like a company called MetaWare, which we're investing in now, which has a solution for opioid leakage. Today there's such a crisis in this just horrible plague of opioids in the States and elsewhere. And these guys have a software solution to stop it, which is really cool.
But take us back. I mean, I read somewhere you were a dropout from Hebrew school. Could
That's
anyone
true.
have looked at you and predicted
Yes, I was
this?
passionate about having fun and about not being stuck in a boring, terrible place
take us
at
back.
4 o'clock. But no, I mean, look, I grew up in a pretty typical Southern California Jewish family, which meant very lowercase j. Okay. My family itself was, sort of more traditionally Jewish, but certainly the environment where I grew up in Brentwood and Pacific Palisades and Los Angeles was anything but. Tons of Jews, but no one Jewed anything.
Yeah.
We didn't Jew much.
Yeah.
And I was sent by my parents to Hebrew school, and I hated it. It was a nightmare. I mean, it was like actually dafka on the days that there was the Little League, right? Which for, any self-respecting 8-year-old kid, and I was like, I despite my size, I like to play sports and stuff.
Yeah.
And I just couldn't believe. Said, what? I'm not going to be able to go play Little League. I'm going to be stuck in some. And then there was this teacher who you couldn't relate to, who didn't speak a word of English, and she was speaking some kind of weird dialect of Hinglish, Hebrew and English, and she had no connection to Jewish anything. It was basically prison for hours a day, and I hated it. So I was expelled, and my parents had to move to a different synagogue. So I could get a bar mitzvah certificate. But, say la vie. Little do they know that I would end up here in Israel.
Your parents immigrated to the United States, I think, from Germany and Russia.
Yes.
And now you are an immigrant in Israel. What impact does that status have on shaping who you are?
I think a big one. I think that being an immigrant is a really cool and wonderful experience. It creates a fertile otherness, a sense of perspective. And it doesn't go away, by the way, in the first generation. So our kids, I think you're immigrants too, our kids will be immigrants to a certain degree. My kids are perfectly fluent in Hebrew and English. They're as Israeli as possibly can be, but they have that connection to an otherness, to another culture. And I think that they're finding all kinds of interesting things in neurology about children that are brought up bilingual or trilingual. Their brains work differently. And I think that there's something there, and I like it. I think it's a very Jewish thing, right? And we've been immigrants for a long time. And by the way, it shows no sign of abatement, right? Here in Israel, we keep on growing, and we keep on spinning people out who go to the States and spend 5 years or 10 years on shlichut or in postdoc or in building their startup, and they come home and they, I think, infuse the country with a lot of strength and a lot of talent. A lot of perspective.
Would you ever consider living anywhere else than Jerusalem
No,
in Israel?
no.
What is this connection with Jerusalem? What is?
It's just the deepest story we have, right? In other words, I'm into stories. I grew up liking to listen to stories from my parents and told them as a young person. And essentially what I do today is I'm a storyteller. I mean, that's pretty much, I think an innovation, what you're doing is you're telling stories about what the future can look like. And the deepest stories in our people are centered around Jerusalem.
You're a founder, but you're a founder from Israel. Could this story have happened anywhere else? Could you have happened anywhere else?
Look, I had an alternative life planned out for me in the States.
Right. Let's hear it.
Oh, it would have been law school. It would have been running for Congress or being a political person. No chance of me doing that here.
Uh-huh.
Not happening.
You've been called an ambassador for Israel. So what does the government here make of you?
I think we work together well, right? In other words, we have good relationships with a bunch of people. I have a lot of deep personal relationships, people in politics. I have a lot of respect for people who go and serve, okay? Mm-hmm. And I think there's an increasing number of high-tech people who are, crossing over and doing that. And that's a good thing. I think the more people who do that, the better. It's way above my pay grade. I can't even imagine. I don't know how people make those kinds of decisions. I mean, to make a decision about whether you send troops in here or there, sending people into harm's way, that's why I wouldn't have made a good officer in the Army. It's just too much for me. It's hard enough for me to make decisions about investment and about, hiring and firing. That's enough for me. Okay, that life and death, especially on a collective level, takes a different kind of person.
You are a big jolly guy.
Thank you.
Yeah. Does Jon Medved have a dark side? When people cross you, is there a dark side to Jon Medved?
Look, I've been known to yell. Okay, you just ask my team. Okay, that occasionally they'll hear like some screaming, and occasionally I'll upset people. Okay, and I hope that I am more positive and encouraging and jolly and friendly than I am a yeller, but I'm passionate about this stuff, and I'm sort of a little bit of a perfectionist, even though I'm far from perfect, and I really want the stuff we do to be at the highest level possible. So sometimes I get frustrated and. And
do you work on yourself on a kind of?
I'll apologize to people afterwards. I mean, if I was out of line, I will tell them, and I'll sometimes do it even publicly. And but generally, I'm under control. I mean, I'm not I'm not violent. I'm not really dark. I'm not vengeful. I don't keep grudges. Okay, in this business, you have ups and downs with people. But I've had a pretty good record of keeping relationships alive over decades, and ups and downs, and life is just too short, right? And all these wonderful people who you meet, you might cross them or have a disagreement. You're going to see them again in the next deal or in the next fund.
I've never heard something bad said about you. Everyone seems to love you.
Oh, that's very sweet.
And my question is,
you haven't done your diligence properly.
I haven't looked hard enough. But can someone be so successful without making enemies? Do you have any enemies?
There are a couple of people who I think don't like me. Okay, and I'm not sure I'm greatly fond of them either. But that's par for that would be weird if you didn't, right? In other words, you can't love everybody. That's sort of. I try. Okay, I like most people very much. I'm very fond of my family and my friends and my community and all that. And I'm really fond of the work environment. I think we have a fun workplace, okay, that today it was really buzzing. There was just like dozens of people and their birthday parties, and there's a Rosh Chodesh lunch, okay, which for those who don't speak the Hebrew is a new, in the Jewish tradition, every month we celebrate the new month. So we celebrate that at Ourcrowd with a lunch where we get the whole company together and bring in burgers or falafel or something. Life is just wonderful. I mean, look, I know there are people who experience different ways of living, okay? And there's a lot of pain and suffering out there in the world that we're sort of commanded to try to ameliorate and to make better. But, when I look back and I just look back at my life, or I look back at what's going on here in Israel, I'm just hugely positive. Okay, I think that we have a lot to be thankful for. And we like to complain a lot. I mean, that's part of our nature as Jews. But we have a lot to be thankful for.
Aside from the Hawaiian shirts, you also wear a kippah. How big of a role? Oh, yeah, you took it off for the interview.
Because I've got this head thing.
Right. How big of a role does Judaism play in your life?
A big role. Look, I didn't grow up with it. I mean, I grew up with being part of a Jewish family, but
how did we go from dropping out of Hebrew school to wearing a kippah?
A lot of hummus and women and adventures and political activism, Zionism, all that stuff led me. I went to Berkeley. Okay, when I grew up in Southern California after being expelled from Hebrew school, I was a political kid, active in the anti-war movement against the Vietnam War, and working for the farm workers and doing all that stuff. So Berkeley was just an obvious choice. I mean, I was going to join the cadres of. Actually, I was I was too conservative for Berkeley because I believed in democracy and sort of democratic capitalism. But there, that was considered totally fascist. So, but I went to Berkeley, and then after my freshman year, I ended up here in Israel because that was the only place my parents would pay for me to go. And that blew my mind and got me really excited about Israel and about learning more about what being Jewish was about. And came back to the campus, and then a couple of days later, literally, the 73 war broke out. And that turned me into a campus activist for Israel because in my campus, Berkeley, there were people protesting under the signs, "Death to the Jews." So that got me going. Mm-hmm. And I was recruited a couple of years later to go work for the Jewish Agency and be an itinerant organizer. And they gave me an old car and a film projector, 16 millimeter, and a bunch of propaganda. And I had the time of my life driving around the Western states organizing and meeting incredible women and men.
You started this by saying that what got you to Judaism was a lot of hummus and women. I'm still trying to wrap my head around that.
There you go.
How do the women and the hummus get you to...
The biggest influence, of course, was my wife, Jane, who I met on this journey after I moved to Israel. I moved to Israel in 1980, got involved in a family startup. My father was a startup guy who had a little company. It's hard to even call it a company. There were 6 people in our basement doing fiber optic transmitters and receivers.
He was a scientist, right?
Physicist. And I decided to sort of join him, and I started raising money for my first startup in Israel before there was a single venture capital fund. So I sort of grew up with the whole ecosystem here. And I met my wife, Jane, here, who was born into a Chicago family and had been captured by her parents and brought here at 14 and fell in love in her own way with the country. And so, Jane and I became married and dragged her back to Los Angeles with my fiber optic company because as soon as I raised money here from ECI Telecom, they said, you got to go to the States because that's where the market is. So while we were there, we joined my family who were active in this unreal, wonderful little community on the beach, on the Venice boardwalk, where a bunch of people were sort of exploring a return to more traditional Jewish observance. And we got into it. And by the time I came back, after we sold the company to Amoco, the big oil company, we got back in 91, I had a kippah on my head, and my kids have always had kippahs on their heads, and sent them to religious schools. But for me, it was never like before and after, like I somehow had changed my life. I just added. I never saw the religious stuff as prohibiting me or stopping or limiting me. Okay, in other words, discipline's probably a good thing in my life. I'm more of a sort of a creative, let it all hang out kind of person, as opposed to narrowly focused. And therefore, the discipline that a more traditional outlook, I think, imposes is a good thing for me. And I just saw all the benefits. Like I saw that what it does for the family, what it does for a sense of belonging, what it does for making sense of what the short life is about, and sort of connecting to a trans-historical, transnational kind of like over the globe kind of thing. I really like it. And being a Jew in Israel, in this wonderful country, is a great thing.
And you're one of 4 brothers?
I'm one of 4 brothers.
They're all very accomplished TV,
Thank God.
radio personalities. Yep. How did that shape your ambition?
My older brother's a guy named Michael Medved, who has a radio show, which he's been doing for almost 2 decades. He's had recently 6 million listeners daily for 3 hours a day. My brothers are very...
We have that.
On the way.
Very...
After Jon Medved's interview, we will.
My brother is really quite an amazing guy, and he was a big influence on my life. And my younger brothers, Ben and Harry, are also great, wonderful people, and we're like 4 bear cubs. My name Medved means bear in Russian, and we grew up
so fitting. I love it. Yeah. I love it.
So we grew up, wrestling and turning the couch. My father was sort of the chief ringleader of this. Would turn the couches over, and we would do a lot of roughhousing. There were a couple of cousins who we were banned from their house because we would destroy the places when we were done with it. But I just spent actually a week ago was with all of my brothers out on the West Coast in Seattle and San Francisco, and I'm really lucky. I think families are underappreciated. Hard to say so, because today everybody's into dysfunctional families, and families can hurt you, and they I'm sure that's all true. My experience of the family has been wonderful.
Do you ever see yourself retiring? And
Never.
If so,
don't know the word.
No.
And that I learned from my dad. Okay, my father, after we sold the fiber optic company, which was called Merit, to Amico, he made Aliyah. Okay, he literally a week or 2 later picked up, came here, and the first thing he did is start a new company, and that was his most successful company, which was doing wireless optical communications, not using fiber but using free space. And he sold that company and then continued on as the chief scientist of this optical communications company till the week before he died. On his grave today, it says, Od Yinavun B'Sevad Shenim V'Ranim Yu, that basically you will become old, but you will stay fertile and fresh, okay, which is in the Psalms, Tzaddik Tamar. And that's the goal,
that's
right?
Beautiful.
I mean, in other words, you just, if you enjoy what you're doing, if you're building, if you're creative, if you're smart, if you haven't lost your faculties, this notion of retirement, I really want to hang out on a golf course. We only have one here in Israel, okay? It's just like, it's so much does not speak to me. I want to be investing. My father, as he was dying, was talking about his next startup, okay? And I think that's the way to go.
So he loved what he did, and he was successful, and you love what you do, and you're successful. Do you know anyone who's successful and doesn't love what they do?
This job that you and I share of being able to fund and enable people to innovate and create new companies and wonderful companies that can help mankind, it doesn't get better than that, right? In other words, just think about it. What do we do all day? Whereas people are pitching us these dreams,
yeah.
And then you have the option of like helping them, okay? And now, it's not always that nice, and sometimes you have to fire CEOs, and sometimes you have to, close down companies, and, things are not always easy, down rounds and all that stuff. But in general, it's an unbelievable job.
I agree. But take us back to Israel Seed, your first fund. You had 2 co-founders there. Ourcrowd, you have no co-founders as far as I understand. Why did you, part ways?
Well, first of all, Israel Seed, when you look back at the sort of the history of this ecosystem, played a really, I think, important role. I mean, my co-founders and my partners at that point were Neil Cohen, Michael Eisenberg, and Alan Feld. And then there were a bunch of other people like Astori Modena and Fitz Haney and others who joined. We had a lot of really great, Story's got his own fund, Terra today. Fitz is at Viola. Michael, of course, is founder of Aleph, and Alan at Vintage. So there was a real. I remember they looked at us like, "What are these Americans doing?"
I didn't know
British.
that story. It's like the PayPal mafia of Israel.
It's really interesting, and look at the companies that we funded. We funded the seed money to Naftali Bennett and Scioto. We funded shopping.com, which was the biggest internet exit in that day at 640 to eBay. Tradium, and people who are funding today, whether it's like the Schreiber brothers, Zvi Schreiber at Tradium or Daniel Schreiber at Lemonade, we did them back 30 years ago, 20 years ago, whenever it was, a long time. So we had a great partnership, and it lasted over a decade, and so these things have a run, some of our partners went on to do other things. Michael went on to Benchmark. Alan went on to found Vintage. I went to go be an entrepreneur again. I built a mobile software startup called Vringo, which had an unbelievably interesting technology and video and social sharing, and got it public on pretty much the strength of the idea, because we had a total of $30,000 of revenue when we took it public in 2010. And that turned out okay.
Where does Ourcrowd look like in 2030?
Really big. I mean, we're just crossed $1 billion threshold. We hope to be, tens of billions at that point. But it's not about the money. It's about what the impact, the kind of companies, the number of jobs. Are we going to take a bite out of hunger, and about disability, and about health? Okay, for all of us, and I think we are. I'm looking at we got 170 companies. We have 18 funds, and our companies are having an impact. There are companies which we're backing today, which are really on the cutting edge, whether it's fighting cancer or opioids, or helping farmers get better yields in places like India, and it's that's really cool. And
but speaking of money, how important is the money aspect? How sweet is it for you, and how important is it for you, and what do you do with it?
I've never been really rich, okay? And maybe someday it'll happen to me. I've always had enough, okay? I'm around people who are rich, and people probably think I'm much richer than I actually am, and that never bothered me. I mean, I don't know what I would do with it. I'm not a car freak, okay? I would love to have a private jet. Okay, that's the one thing, the trappings of the ultra wealthy, which would be great because I do a lot of traveling, and that's, although I've never been in one.
Never?
No, never. So anyone out there wants to bring me on their private jet, please. Okay, I've never done that.
Do you have like a huge mansion in Jerusalem?
No, I have a nice house. Okay, it's not a huge. I mean, by when you say huge mansions, I've been to many huge mansions. I mean, I think the Sultan of Brunei has 1,800 rooms. That's a huge mansion. Okay, I have a nice house, but I'm motivated. I have to work. I've got 8 grandchildren. Okay, I've got 4 kids in this country. You got to help them. So I'm still I'm still motivated and trying to do well for myself, but that's not that's not every week. I don't sit down and count and say, okay, how am I doing? What I'm looking at is have I learned any lessons over the last 20, 30 years? Am I making the same mistakes, or am I making new mistakes? How am I doing in terms of recruiting people and managing a team? I think that's ultimately the biggest part of this is who are you bringing on, and how are you letting them excel, and helping them and mentoring them, and especially how do we do that with companies? This whole thing about being an investor is such a wildly interesting thing, because on the one hand you're involved and you got to give them money, you got to help them, and you got to sort of guide them and give them a little bit of pushback when they're wrong. But on the bottom line, it's their company, right? You're a minority shareholder. And one of the mistakes a lot of venture capitalists makes, they think they're running these companies. You're not. Okay, you can help. Sometimes you have to intervene because the guys, screw it up. but that's seldom, thank God. Mostly it's like, how do you become like a midwife in this whole process? I mean,
Is there any, speaking of startups and hacking, any life hacks you've embraced in the last 6 months? Maybe health or time management?
I'm bad at health. I mean, I sort of ignore health.
Uh-huh.
And the last couple of days I've actually been working on a diet, so I'm hoping that takes.
Or maybe you'll find a startup that does it for you.
Well, yeah, there's a bunch of startups. I am just too into the moment and having fun. And what I do is, tons of dinners and lunches, and it becomes difficult. That's really hard for me. But, it's just never, I'm okay. Okay. I'm a big guy, but I am active, and I hike and I play ball with my grandkids and still wrestle with my brothers. And that's okay. In terms of life lessons, Shabbat. If I had to say what is the best hack that I adopted, about, it's almost like 30 years ago, was the Shabbat. Okay.
Just turning it off.
Yeah, just one day where you say, no, thank you. No TV, no messaging, no shopping, no money, no work. I'm not getting back. I'm just like hanging with my family and my friends, drinking good scotch, eating incredible food that my wife prepares, singing, like I love that, around the table.
Can we have some of that here?
Not unless you get my daughter.
Next time we'll bring scotch.
I find that to be hugely regenerative, right? In other words, I just got back from a 6-city, 9-day tour in this North America. And it was really, it's a pain, and I'm not a young guy anymore, but I came back, and then luckily I went pretty much right into Shabbat. And as soon as my grandkids are sitting on my, knee and practicing Echad Mi Yodea, and they're doing pretty good at it, these 7-year-olds, which is a song we sing at Passover. I got a glass of really good wine in my hand, and I just started to feel better, Sure. Now it's already the week is upon us, and I'm full of energy, and I think that's the best life hack I've got.
I think that's great advice.
Founder Stories is brought to you by F2 Capital in partnership with IDC International Radio and No Camels. Subscribe now on your favorite podcast app.